Okay, so when you hear the words world peace, what pops into your head? You're probably thinking big treaties, political handshakes, that kind of thing. But what if the real blueprint, the actual key to it all, is rooted in something much closer to home, in our own psychology? Well, that's what we're digging into today. A research-backed strategy that completely rethinks how we build lasting peace, from the ground up. So, let's just start with that one massive question. Where does lasting peace really begin? I'm not talking about just a temporary ceasefire, but a real, sustainable peace where people and whole societies can actually thrive. It turns out, the usual answers, they don't quite hit the mark. The peace research we're exploring argues that real peace isn't something that's just forged in the halls of power or won on a battlefield. Nope, those are just the outcomes, not the origin point. The real start is somewhere much, much more personal. And there it is. The single most important factor for peace is identified as empathy. That's it. This one human quality is presented as the absolute psychological prerequisite for a world without violence and oppression. Kind of surprising, right? So, how on earth does that actually work? Well, that brings us to our first big idea, the empathy engine. This is where we get into the psychology of it all. We're going to define what empathy actually means in this context and see exactly how it works as the foundation for a peaceful world. What's so fascinating here is this very specific definition of empathy. See, it's not just about feeling what someone else feels. It's really a two-step process. First, you have to recognize that someone is suffering. And second, you feel this need to do something about it. It's active, not passive. You could almost call it feeling with your feet. So here's the thing. It seems we're all born with empathy, but it can be damaged. It can even be destroyed. And the research points to two main culprits that do the damage. First, what happens to us in childhood, and second, the kind of legal and moral world our society creates around us. These two ideas, they're going to be the core of this entire explainer. All right, let's follow that thread, starting at the very beginning, childhood. In this section, we're going to look at the incredibly powerful link between how we raise our kids and how peaceful our countries end up being. And here's the kicker. This isn't just a theory. There is a direct, provable correlation. When researchers put data from UNICEF on violent discipline next to the Global Peace Index, a super clear pattern just jumped out. More violence in the home directly equals less peace in the nation. It's a startlingly simple equation, but man, the implications are huge. And the evidence just keeps stacking up. You look at the biographies of leaders who start wars, and so often you find these stories of violent or neglectful childhoods, which just wrecks their empathy. Then you look at the world's most peaceful countries. Guess what? They've all banned corporal punishment. And we just talked about the data correlation. It all points to the same thing. A childhood that's all about obedience instead of empathy can create what's called an authoritarian personality, someone who just follows destructive orders, no questions asked. Okay, so we've seen the impact inside the home. Now let's zoom out and look at the public sphere with this idea of the legislation peace nexus. This is all about how a country's laws can literally build or break a culture of empathy. This is such a critical concept. Laws aren't just a list of rules with punishments attached. They are powerful teachers. They send a really clear signal about what a society values, and they actively shape the moral compass of everyone living in it. So if certain kinds of violence aren't legally prohibited, well, that violence becomes normal, and the collective empathy of that society just starts to wear away. This table here, the Culture of Violence Index, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? Look at the pattern. In less peaceful nations, the legal protections for the most vulnerable groups are often weak, or they just don't exist at all. We're talking about corporal punishment, domestic violence, marital rape. When a society fails to legally protect its people, it's basically saying that kind of violence is acceptable, and that tells you everything you need to know about its collective empathy. So we've got the home, we've got the laws, but what other pillars hold up a culture of nonviolence? Well, now we're going to look at the huge roles that gender equality, different models of masculinity, and of course, the media play in all this. And this one isn't just a nice idea. It's a scientifically proven fact recognized by the UN and everything. Countries that enforce women's rights are more peaceful. Period. Think about it for a second. If a society can't even recognize and act on the suffering of half of its own population, how could it possibly have the capacity for broader peace? It's a fundamental test of a country's empathy.
The research also points to these two competing ideas of masculinity. On one side, you have violent masculinity, which isn't genetic, it's learned, usually rooted in childhood violence itself. But on the other side, you have caring masculinity, which is fostered by things like involved active fatherhood. I mean, when men care for little kids, for fragile beings, they develop greater empathy. It's a skill you can build. And you can encourage this by getting more men into social professions, creating this awesome positive feedback loop of care.
And then, of course, there's the media. We all know that being bombarded with violence all the time can just make us numb to it. It erodes our empathy. And a news cycle that only shows war and crime, it just makes peace feel totally impossible. But when the media reports on peace initiatives, it gives us hope. The source also gives a warning about social media, how it can sometimes reward what the Germans call Schadenfreude, taking pleasure in other people's problems, which is basically the exact opposite of empathy. Okay, so how do we actually build these skills? Well, this work lays out a really clear game plan. We need to be teaching things like mediation and nonviolent communication right in our schools. Peer mediation programs where students help each other solve conflicts? Amazing for building empathy. But it can't stop there. We need to offer these skills to adults too, ideally for free, and shout about them from the rooftops in the media so they become part of our everyday toolkit. All right, this is where it all comes together. The big unifying idea that ties everything we've talked about, from childhood to laws to the media, into one single comprehensive strategy. It's called peace mainstreaming. So what on earth is peace mainstreaming? Well, put simply, it's when a government or political group decides that peacefulness isn't just the job of the foreign ministry. It's a core priority in every single area of society. Health, education, justice, you name it. It's a totally holistic and consistent approach to building peace. You can kind of think of it like a tree. The roots are all the things we've been talking about. Laws that ban violence, an education system that teaches empathy, media that promotes peace, and a culture of equality. When you make sure all those roots are strong and healthy, the tree of peace can actually grow and flourish. It's a total system approach. Now, I know this all might sound huge, right? Like, what can I, one person, possibly do about government strategy? But the research is really clear that this whole thing is a long-term project that has to be built from the ground up. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What can you do? And here are the real, tangible steps. It starts right in our own homes, by committing to raising kids without violence. It continues out in our communities, by advocating for laws that protect the vulnerable. And it extends to our politics, by holding our leaders' feet to the fire on things they've already committed to, like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Every single one of these actions, no matter how small it feels, is a building block in this bigger project. Look, nobody's saying this is a quick fix. The source material is very clear. This is a long-term, generational strategy. But its long-term nature is exactly why the work has to start right now, as soon as possible, like today. So we'll leave you with this thought. If this entire complex blueprint for creating world peace really does boil down to that one simple, powerful human quality, empathy, then that gives every single one of us a place to start. In our homes, in our communities, in our everyday conversations. The only question is, where will you choose to build it first?